Bob Biase introduced me. I'm going to return the favor and introduce Bob Biase, who is a member of NSS and the Space Frontier Foundation, and a member of the technical staff of Belcorp. And he will be speaking on market implications of cheap access capability coupled with light mass SPS. So Bob, I'll turn it over to you.
I don't have any pretty pictures, but I do have some view graphs. I apologize up front because a lot of them have numbers on them, and numbers tend to be boring. But I think the numbers, when you see them, I think many of them will be sweet. I hope so, anyway. And so I want to talk about what are the market implications of cheap access capability, especially if you couple this with the light mass solar power satellites that Seth talked about. And the question that I want to address are there markets that can not only benefit from, but justify the development of Delta Clipper technology? All right. This is sort of a reverse pitch from a reverse point of view than we normally think. Normally we say, if we had Delta Clipper technology, then these markets would arise. Okay, but here we're going to sort of take the opposite point of view and look at the potential market space and see if there's anything out there that could drive the development of Delta Clipper technology. Now, if there were, it could be done privately, although not necessarily. Even if it were to be done in the public sector, the fact that you could identify a potential high-volume market would be very beneficial. Okay, so it works both ways. Not only would we like to be able to develop Delta Clipper technology, but I think, continuing on Dr. Galvet's thought, we want to be able to develop infrastructure in general. Okay, so we want a driver to drive the development of infrastructure. And so we're sort of looking for this potential mother lode, if you will. And so we're not going to be examining how the Delta Clipper lower prices could start new markets, which is certainly true. So I just want to make that clear up front, that I'm sort of taking an inverse point of view here. And I think in order to really get an understanding of what I'm saying here, I have to dwell a little bit on just markets and capability, at least sort of model it so that it makes some sort of sense. And basically, I'm going to model markets with a demand curve. And this is just very generic sort of stuff, so I want to go through it kind of fast. And basically, a demand curve tells you how much commodities or services are in demand at a particular price. Okay, so at this price here, there is such and such a demand, this quantity. And as the price gets lower, the quantity goes up. Okay, and there are a number of features of this particular demand curve. In this particular demand curve, I've called something here a threshold, because the curve doesn't go up any higher. And why it may not go up any higher, there may be some competitive technology, some competing technology, such that if the price goes up, you switch from the technology that is driving this demand curve to another technology. Okay. Also, you may find a market saturation point, which means that if you drop the price below a certain point, then no matter how much you drop the price, the volume doesn't increase anymore. Okay. Also, on my demand curves, they're all going to be log scale. So the slope of the demand curve is an indication of the market elasticity. And basically what that means, in an elastic market, the total revenue, which is the price times the quantity, increases as the price goes down. In an inelastic market, the total revenue decreases as the price goes down. So just a little concept here to sort of set the stage. And, okay, I've already mentioned this. So how do you characterize launch capability? Well, on our demand curve, now our demand curve is going to be about launches. So quantity is now launches per year, and our price is now the launch price. Okay, so our demand curve here says that as I lower the price here, I'm increasing the number of launches per year until I reach this saturation point. And then when I lower the price, my launch price, for this particular market, whatever it is, my quantity, number of launches doesn't increase for me. All right, superimposed on this, I have a range, which is now the capability of my particular launch vehicle. And I have some examples of some ranges here. Expendables and shuttles, they go between $15,000 per pound and maybe $3,000 per pound, very roughly. The Delta Clipper, I know you've announced prices of $500 a pound, and this would be sort of introductory type prices. And then with maturing technology and with high volumes, you could perhaps lower it to as little as $50 a pound. So you have a range there. So this would be the lower range, and this would be the upper range of the vehicle system that we're talking about. The next thing I'd like to talk about is some examples where markets and Delta Clipper capability don't match. And I do this just maybe to clear out some cobwebs. I think it's a useful exercise anyway. And first example is going to be communication satellites. Now, communication satellites is the only real viable market we have today. It's it. And actually, I have two curves here. One is sort of the existing market, and this curve over here is sort of the market a la Bill Gates, Macaw, Iridium, ... Okay? Basically, we have a market that is not being driven by the cost of launch. It's being driven by other factors entirely. It's being driven by factors in the telecommunications industry. Typically, ground station costs. Right now, the market, I have it in scales of around 10 launches a year. I think would probably be a typical launch rate for today's telecommunication market. And given Iridium and all these 840 satellites that go up into, that make up the Macaw-Gates network, I think I'm optimistic if I give them 100 flights a year. If you figure out the 840, I don't know, somebody did a calculation, it came to about 50 launches per year in 2 years. And then you have maintenance over a period of time. on that system. And if you figured the satellite lifespan is maybe 5 years or so, it really comes down to about 20 launches per year for that particular network. And if you figure, well, okay, the next maybe demand will grow, but the next satellite could very well have greater capability. I mean, a typical communication satellite could have 100,000 channels, and they have a tremendous amount of capability. So it takes a tremendous amount of telecommunication demand to give you a small increase in demand in the launch service industry. And this is a problem. This is a problem that we deal with. I think Dr. Galvitz talked about it a little bit. And if you look at the capabilities of expendables here, I graciously made it inelastic. It actually has a curve here. I really don't know what it is. I mean, this is pure guesstimate, but I'm sure it's fairly inelastic. And I mean, as far as Delta Clipper capability, it's probably inelastic. Suppose you did develop a Delta Clipper, it existed, and you look at this market, there would be no incentive to lower your price because you would never make any more money with it. You wouldn't get any more volume from this market if you lowered your price. So whatever you started out at, that would be it. Okay. And I think this just summarized some of the things I've already said. I don't think there's anything new here.
You could drive competitors out of business.
Yeah, that's basically it. But in a sense, your whole market has depressed. Okay, the next one I want to look at is space tourism. And it's sort of at the opposite end of the spectrum. I mean, it's a different type of market than communication satellites. It's a highly elastic market. Communication satellites were very inelastic. This is very elastic, and which is a nice quality. Unfortunately, you look at the capability of the proposed Delta Clipper at $500 a pound and $50 a pound, and you look at, well, maybe I should try to justify some of these numbers here. I mean, this is purely a guesstimate, but up here, let's see. First of all, I have dollars per pound over here, and I've superimposed on here ticket price, and this is based on 50 passengers per Delta Clipper, and I'm assuming a Delta Clipper is the standard 20,000 pound payload Delta Clipper. Okay, I'm not assuming anything different here. Then over here I have passengers. All right, so I've equated launches per year to passengers per year. All right, so now let's say you start at the top end here. This is $500 a pound. That would be a ticket price of say $200,000. And then what would that mean? That would be one launch per year, maybe 50 passengers. Okay, that's not a very big market. Now, you could reverse this and say, if you had the Delta Clipper technology, could you start the space tourism market? And the answer is absolutely yes. Okay, but I'm taking it from the point of view, the opposite point of view. Given the dynamics of this type of market, does it justify the development of this type of technology? And even when you got to its lowest price, right, $50 a pound here, at this $50 a pound, you get maybe 100 flights per year, which is about 5,000 passengers, which is nothing to sneeze at, by the way. That's very good. But still, it's only 100 flights a year, which was sort of what we said our optimistic communication satellite model gave us. Right, so we're not that much better. But there is a difference. I think there is a difference between this market and communication satellite market. The ComSat market can take advantage of the overcapacity that exists for expendable launches. space tourism really can't. So if you wanted to start space tourism and you wanted to go this route, it is sufficiently different that you can't really use the expendables. You would have to develop something else. So does space tourism provide the incentive to develop the Delta Clipper type of capability? And I sort of give this a qualified maybe. I don't think it's compelling, and that's the problem. It's sort of on the verge, but it's not quite there. And I think we would like to see something more compelling. Instead of maybe 100 flights a year, something like 1,000 flights per year. And there you would definitely exhaust your existing expendable capability. You would exhaust the existing capacity. You know, because if you want to go to the bank and ask for investment for some new capacity, they would ask you what's happening with your existing capacity. And if it's not exhausted, why do you want more? Okay, so we have to exhaust the existing capacity before you go asking for new capacity. And so let's proceed. So I think there is a market that more or less matches, or at least has the capability of matching the Delta Clipper's capability. And I think this is the light mass solar power satellites. When I saw Seth's article in the SSI update, and I did just a back of the envelope type of calculation, and that's basically what I'm sharing with you is just a refined back of the envelope here. This is again a zero order approximation. I was still impressed with the numbers that started to fall out. Okay, I want to estimate the market threshold. And remember, the threshold in my curve was that top line, and that's the price that I have to get below in order to really generate the market. If I'm above that price, then there are too many competing technologies, and my market will go somewhere else. In this case, my market being electricity production. Okay. Now, I'm assuming a steady production of electricity, and for this I looked at and notice this is Seth's designation here, bicycle wheel with mirror, and the inflatable sphere. So I looked at those two. I said my total energy cost has to be less than or equal to 7 cents a kilowatt hour. Now, Seth gave some very good reasons why that number should be 23 cents a kilowatt hour. However, I will revisit the 23 cents a kilowatt hour later. But my interest is in generating a mass market, okay, not just starting it. I want to have a large number of flights per year. All right, so I think I have to break this 7 cents a kilowatt hour in order to do that. All right, so that's the reason why I'm going to stick with that. I'm going to assume the specific launch cost to low Earth orbit of $500 a pound. This is the starting price of the Delta Clipper. I'm going to assume a 10-year cost recovery period, which is not unusual for energy-type projects. And I'm going to estimate terrestrial solar energy costs, and these came from State of the World, from World Watch Institute, which is an environmental publication. And so I think their numbers are fairly conservative because they were endeavoring to show that we don't need any new electricity production at all. Okay, that was what they were endeavoring to show. So I think their numbers, whatever numbers they give you here, are probably very conservative. Although actually come to think of it, their numbers on terrestrial costs may be optimistic. I don't know. But but I've seen this number before in different contexts. 16 cents a kilowatt hour now, and they estimated 10 cents a kilowatt hour a decade at the end of the decade. And I used Seth Potter's specific power numbers: the bicycle wheel with mirror, the 0.67 kilowatts per pound, the inflated sphere, 30.35 kilowatts per pound, and the NASA reference, 0.067 kilowatts per pound. And now, actually, this title here, estimate of market threshold, it's really a misnomer. What I'm really doing here, I'm estimating the total energy cost. But we need to know the market threshold in order to draw our demand curve. But we can infer the threshold if we know the total energy cost. So we're going to endeavor to find the total energy cost. And my estimation is that it's the SPS component of energy cost, and this is the cost of manufacturing the solar power satellite in terms of energy. That is dollars per kilowatt hour. The low Earth orbit component of that energy cost, again, in dollars per kilowatt hour, and then the cost of sending your satellite to geosynchronous orbit. The SPS component of these energy costs, I'm going to estimate as being the terrestrial solar energy cost times some adjustment factor. Okay, we know, well, we don't really know. We're guesstimating the terrestrial solar energy costs. Those are that 16 cents a kilowatt hour and the 10 cents by the end of the decade. The low Earth orbit component, this is the specific launch cost divided by the recovery period in years, the specific power in kilowatts per pound. This is where Seth's numbers get pumped in, and then this conversion number between hours and years. Okay, and purely guesstimation here. I'm saying that the cost of going from LEO to GEO is the same as the cost from Earth to LEO. Purely a guess. And I'm assuming a fully reusable, there would have to be some sort of fully reusable system there. I might make note here, in my model, I'm assuming very little infrastructure in order to put this up. Okay, if you want to generate infrastructure, you have to first start out using very little infrastructure, but then have some sort of a cost generator that makes it possible for you to invest in the infrastructure. Okay, so at first, you can't start building infrastructure by assuming that you have the infrastructure. And that's one of the problems. You get this circular reasoning. So you need to start out with a system that uses very little infrastructure and then improves as you add infrastructure. Okay, again, let's see, what am I looking at here? Okay, I'm trying to figure out the solar power satellite component of the energy costs. And this is for the bicycle wheel with mirror, the inflatable sphere, and the NASA for 2 time periods, today and the end of the decade. And I use the 2 numbers here, 16 cents a kilowatt hour and 10 cents a kilowatt hour. For the adjustment factor, because of the geometry, I assumed you could divide by 7 here, and because this is a sphere, I only divided by 3. I've also, on the margins here, you don't see it, but I have it in my notes here, I've refigured it for simply dividing it by 3. I don't know which is the better estimator. I think perhaps simply dividing it by 3 is more conservative. And so I'll give both numbers. Basically, these here are the numbers. The solar power satellite component. If you divide everything by 3, this comes out to 5 1/3 cents, and this comes out to 3 1/3 cents. And this is 5 1/3, 3 1/3 again. Hmm? Okay. Okay, all right, so I figured out the SPS costs, and now I want to add in the low Earth orbit costs and the geo costs. And so I said the geo costs were the same as the LEO costs, and using the formula back, where is it? I can't see. Okay, using this is the formula for calculating this column here. All right, I get 0.8 of a cent for as my low Earth orbit cost. 0.8 of a cent per kilowatt hour. And adding these up, this is the really amazing part here. I mean, this is 4 cents a kilowatt hour for the bicycle wheel with mirror, using just a guesstimate based upon today's photovoltaics. And if you assume photovoltaics by the year 2000 were like 3 cents a kilowatt hour. Right, if I use my more conservative estimator, if I don't divide by 7, if I divide by 3 to go from my estimation from terrestrial solar to solar power satellite, I get figures of 7 cents a kilowatt hour here and 5 cents a kilowatt hour here. Both very good. All of these figures are really very good. All of them beat or equal the 7 cents a kilowatt hour criteria that we set for ourselves. Now, what type of a market does this lead to? Oh, just by way of comparison, the NASA study here gives you like 19 cents a kilowatt hour, 18.2 cents. For the other estimator of the SPS component, it gives you 22 cents and 20 cents, showing that for the NASA estimate, the transportation really is the driver here. For these here, the SPS is becoming the driver. Okay, now we want to estimate market size. And so I start with a fact. Well, I think it's a fact. It's a number I got from, again, the World Watch Institute. And their numbers indicate that world power production has doubled in 20 years. The current world power production is 4.5 terawatts. And electricity makes up 30% of that for 1.35 terawatts. Now here's where we part company with World Watch. I assume another doubling in the next 20 years. So this comes to 67 gigawatts per year additional electric power, and I'm assuming this is coming mostly from third world countries. Now actually this is a lot less than what Seth gave you. I mean, what I've left out here, I mean, I haven't assumed electric cars. I haven't, I've discounted the fact that much of the fossil and nuclear electric generating capacity is old and needs to be, is in need of replacement. I mean, I've discounted all these things and just assumed that this is coming mostly from third world countries. So I think my estimates here are very conservative. And so my estimates of mass into orbit here, for the bicycle wheel with mirror, I get 80 million pounds per year. For the inflatable sphere, I get 153 million pounds per year. And the NASA model gave me 800 million pounds per year. And now I translate this into payload size. And for this, I do this for 3 payload sizes. For the typical 20,000 pound Delta Clipper, for 40,000 pound payload and an 80,000 pound payload. Now, actually, this number here, this configuration, 80,000 pound payload, matches Seth's calculation. Yours was 40 metric tons, so that's approximately 80,000 pounds of payload. So one payload would be a mirror, and the other payload would be the actual collector and transmitter. These, however, these two at least are not entry-level Delta Clippers. We're talking second or third generation, so we've lost some advantage here. There is a problem. Seth has already talked about the problem of scaling it down, and the other problem would be scaling your reusable space system up. Right? Perhaps they can meet in the middle here. I don't know. Without too much difficulty. As you increase the size here, though, you're going to increase your development costs. Right? So that's a disadvantage.
But not appreciable.
Not appreciably.
Actually, I'm surprised at how well it's done.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a point, there are ways to scale my design down, but there's a point where you have the opposite problem from the 5 gigawatt design. I mean, you don't want really a 5 megawatt satellite. You have to integrate too many little pieces.
Although 5 megawatt satellites may be very good for some markets. Yeah. All right, and then just to complete this here, notice the very high launch rates for the NASA reference here. But now, the reason for doing all this manipulation here is to put this on this demand curve. I wanted to create a demand curve for it. And actually, all I did was find these points here. But I know it's going to be in an elastic market. It's like a telecommunication satellite market, unfortunately. But the volumes are just so much bigger. Okay, and I'm inferring the threshold here based upon 4 cents a kilowatt hour, and that would be like maybe $1,000 a pound launch price. With the more conservative estimation, you fall right on the $500 a pound launch price. So your entry-level Delta Clipper price is right in the ballpark here. Okay. Now for the inflatable sphere, we're close to it, but we're a little bit below. We're a little bit below the entry-level price. So that assumes that somehow or other you've ramped up the volume somewhere else. Or you can convince people to start out with a high volume. Also, as the threshold goes down, the volume of launches goes up. Okay, so here's the NASA study, and it assumes like a mature system already. Right? In order for it to work, you almost have to have a mature system working in order to get these prices low enough so that you can get onto get below the threshold of that curve. But if you do, you have a whole lot more volume here. You have like between 10 to the 4th and 10 to the 5th launches per year, very high volume. And actually, I think I came out to 40,000 launches per year because I assumed 20,000 payloads. So, the last slide here, I threw everything together. I superimposed all three markets on top of each other just to see what it says here. And basically, let's start at this top line here. This is our introductory price. And so coming over to the right, first thing we hit is space tourism. Right? That's not a very high volume there. It's like 1 flight per year. We keep going over, and now we hit the communication satellites, the old market. The new market for communication satellite, we keep coming over, and then finally we hit the solar power satellite here using the bicycle wheel mirror configuration, and that gives us over 1,000. Look, I think on the chart it was like 4,000 flights per year. Okay. One additional comment here. I didn't look at your lunar figures that closely, but I would suspect, I have here NASA in parentheses lunar. I would suspect that the lunar curve would be somewhere between these two. In other words, it would have a threshold somewhere below the entry level of a Delta Clipper system, but it would generate maybe an order of magnitude more volume. All right? And that's interesting when you're thinking about generating infrastructure. Okay? So basically, here's a recipe for infrastructure. Launch efficiencies drive down internal costs, and the additional revenues are invested in further cost reduction technology and infrastructure. All right, competition in the market with something like 4,000 flights per year drive down the cost to SPS operators, and they use the additional revenue to invest in lunar manufacturing capability. All right. And of course, the lunar manufacturing SPSs are cheaper to build, but they require more flights. Right, so one thing is feeding the other. I said I would comment very briefly on the 23 cents a kilowatt hour. And let's see if I can figure out my notes here. This would, in my view, be sort of a niche SPS market that would be useful in starting up the SPS market. And what's interesting is that the NASA reference figures, let's see, I have slide 15. I can read my slides. Okay, these NASA reference figures, especially, well, the 19 cents or the 22 cents if you do the other way of figuring it, and the 20 cents a kilowatt hour. These both fall below the 23 cents per kilowatt hour that you said was sort of a break even, right? And what's interesting about the NASA reference, now the NASA reference, remember, is based upon the old, is it the old specific power of 0.067 kilowatts per pound. All right, so this is without the very light solar collectors. Right? But you could get the same figures. Right? You could get the same figures. Notice there's an order of magnitude difference between this specific power for the NASA reference and the specific power for Seth's bicycle wheel with mirror. Right? But we could get that order of magnitude difference by increasing the launch costs. Right? Suppose we used the 67 cents per kilowatt, 0.67 kilowatts per pound, but we used $5,000 per pound as our specific launch cost. We would have the same total costs here. Right? The cost would be the same. So this would be like launching the light solar power satellites, but with a conventional rocket. All right? And that still comes to below the 23 cents a kilowatt hour, which is sort of interesting. Which says that with conventional rockets, you could start the market. You could start in the niche spaces where it makes worthwhile sense to do this. You could do it. And that seems like an interesting way to start off the market, and once the market develops and you've tested it out, it then becomes compelling to look at the mass market and see how it could generate much better launch technologies like Delta Clipper. Any questions?
In your numbers on space tourism, $50 a pound, you gave a figure of $20,000 a person, I think?
Yeah.
Well, $20,000 a person, I would say at least in the United States, the upper 2% income group could afford it. Do you think? I'd say that's a reasonable figure?
It's a guesstimate. I don't know.
Well, that's it. I mean, that's like a $150,000 or $200,000 a year income level. We're talking about the upper 2%.
Okay.
So that's 5 million people. Now, if you just say 1% of that group is going to travel a year, that's 50,000 people a year, which is 10 times the number you use, which changes the economics drastically. Maybe taking a look at those numbers.
Okay, I put it on a straight line. If what you say is true, it's not quite a straight line.
But it's 10, well, like I said, it's 10 times as many flights as you projected, which...
If it's true.
When you realize there are a lot of fairly affluent people in the United States.
Around the world.
Yeah, and around the world. Well,
Yeah.
we know the numbers. I mean, the 2% is important because last year the big debate over raising
All right, and
taxes, those numbers.
here's my confession. Here's where my numbers came from. You know, John Denver was one person. He was willing to spend $1 million, and on the other end is aircraft. You know, airplane flights, and we have hundreds of millions of people spending maybe hundreds of dollars for a ticket. All right, so you join a straight line there, and you know the devil between it. And, I'm an order of magnitude off. Like I said, I gave it a qualified maybe. And if what you say is true, then maybe there's more an imperative there than what I've estimated. Yes.
I think they already sold 5,000 tickets in Britain.
At what price?
I don't remember. But I think the tickets have been sold was $5,000. Isn't that right? How much?
It's in trust, isn't it?
Yeah.
About $5,000.
5,000 tickets, 5,000 tickets. The
Whether
second
that's the
thing,
final cost or not.
Yeah, but according to my curve though, at $5,000, that's like $5 a pound, which is beyond the Delta Clipper capability.
also, well, I think that's just the basic price, the reservation is the anticipated price later. Anyway, my electric bill is 7.6 cents per kilowatt hour, of which 1.3 cents is fuel cost. The rest, I assume, is infrastructure billing, maintenance of the power line, replacement of transformers, fix-it when the ice storm comes. They are going to only buy the electricity from you at the 0.013 levels, not the whole selling price to the customer. I There may be a little bit more in there that may work, and we don't have to build a generator, but still, there's a massive overhead of maintenance and original construction of the distribution line. So it isn't all of that price is what I'm saying.
Yeah.
All of it.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe half or less.
Yeah, I really don't know. It's purely, I mean, the 7 cents a kilowatt hour is something you see over and over again. I have no idea how reliable it is. But there is something interesting though, comparing, say, building a new fossil fuel plant or a nuclear plant, and with an SPS. If they're manufactured, they're light. I mean, 50,000 pounds, 80,000 pounds is light. How long does it take to manufacture this? And if you have a system for putting it up like Delta Clipper with a day turnaround rate, you order the thing, and a few days later, you get it off the shelf and ship it up. How long does it take to engineer, build, get in service a nuclear plant or a fossil fuel plant?
Oh, at least 10, maybe 20 years.
Yeah.
Well, gas turbine plants are much bigger than that.
Well, yeah, I know gas turbines are better.
Yeah, completely coal and things, but that's mainly because of the regulatory environment.
Okay, but at any rate, we can compete. I think we can compete with oil and nuclear. Gas might give us a run for our money, but gas still puts carbon into the atmosphere. This puts none in. You can make some arguments here, John.
Yeah. The significant point that was brought up about the conventional power plants are the fact that when you build a conventional power plant, you're building a plant which uses many dissimilar parts, which have to be put together in a certain order, which takes many years. Whereas a power satellite consists of many identical parts, which can be put together almost all at the same time through an assembly line process. And so instead of like in a nuclear plant where you have to build your foundation, your infrastructure, do all your concrete work, install your reactor inside the vessel, all these different steps, which in some cases last 15 years, theoretically you can build a power satellite with a automated process in say 6 months once you build your automated plant, which makes a tremendous difference in the fact that once you have a facility to build them, you can turn them out as though they were a commodity.
Can I add something to that? Sure. This is even more true for the thin film design if you can integrate the microwave transmitters. You don't need a separate antenna. You just crank out acres of the stuff and cut it into the shape that you want, or paste strips of it in the shape that you want. But it also increases the reliability, by the way, because no single part is crucial to the operation of the satellite. Whereas, something goes wrong with your core, and you better shut down the nuclear power plant nice and fast. But when it fails, it doesn't fail catastrophically, and that's 2 points in one. By catastrophically, I mean both in the sense that if you lose a quarter of it, that's all you've lost. And the other thing is, if something goes wrong, nobody gets hurt. The beam, if the beam loses track of the ground station, it becomes defocused. It wouldn't fry people even if it stayed focused, although I, for one, would not want to retire in the middle of the beam. But your point is well taken. That is, it's in some sense a simpler device. You don't have to pour a foundation, build a core, build a turbine, and so on.
Now I think you're probably aware of the concept of a jig factory. That when you're actually building something like a power satellite in space, you don't have all these pieces and people floating around. You have a giant jig, which may be several miles long, which serves as a assembly area for the satellite, and all the materials flow into that, and the machinery, basically robotic machinery, takes the materials and one section at a time, whether it's circular or whatever, it sort of extrudes the finished satellite. That's the way to do it.
Yeah. I just want to repeat something I said earlier, and that is my initial assumption is that I'm using very little infrastructure to put these satellites up. I have a Delta Clipper, I have something to transfer, an orbital transfer vehicle, and that's it. What other infrastructure do you need? Okay, but with that, I have enough volume and I'm generating enough revenue from it that I can now build additional infrastructure. And with this additional infrastructure, I can reduce prices further. So there's an incentive for me to build this infrastructure. So I always have a positive push to build more infrastructure. Okay, but you have to start off with enough volume, enough oomph to goose it along. You know, you have to prime the pump.
Yeah, you go straight to the point. Of course, we're talking about the space component. The ground component is probably going to be where you're going to hit sticking points. And as you said, the infrastructure on the ground is going to be vitally important in terms of transmission lines. And there is one obvious place to put solar power receiving sites, and that is to float them onto hydroelectric dams where the power lines already exist. You then get a complementary system because hydropower systems are used as storage systems because they can be switched on demand. And they have the rights-of-way corridors already existing. Now, if you have solar power satellites, you can use the strength of the solar power satellites to act as pump storage or offload on the hydroelectric. So you've got a combination of the two. Just a suggestion, that's an obvious place to put them. You don't have the real estate problem.
Actually, Jeff Landis also wrote a paper in which he suggested that SPS can complement terrestrial solar. I don't remember if he literally meant that you could put one under the other, but you in principle could.
Yeah.
But this is even better, and that is you have not only a complementary energy source, but pump storage on site.
One point on that, building pump storage has become as difficult as building anything else in the electric utility industry.
Oh, yeah.
Plus, putting the antennas at the hydroelectric plants probably would exceed the capacity of the transmission lines.
It depends on the hydro plant. The point about hydro plants depends on which utility is doing it. First of all, you've already got the rights of way. I mean, the rights of way exist, and one of the problems is establishing a new right of way. That's one of the big regulators. You've already got the right of way. You can
Would you
expand right of way.
anticipate putting up more lines on that
Oh,
right
well,
away?
you could.
Or upgrading the voltage?
The other, well, either. You essentially have to put big up power lines on. The second point is, and I'm sort of working off the top of my head of this, is that a lot of these hydroelectric stations, of course, work on a seasonal cycle. They can't be run. There is a problem because the rain doesn't fall continuously. They work on a seasonal cycle. They have to fill the dam up and then run it. I'm not talking about pump storage. I'm talking about the fact that you can offload power. You'd have to lay out a beam switch from hydro station to hydro station to allow for different rain patterns and so on and so forth.
Hydro station within 50 miles of here, I don't think operates that way.
Hmm? Oh,
Niagara Falls.
Niagara Falls, does that
I
cycle?
don't think it, because it's icy, no, because it's got Great Lakes.
Oh, well, yeah, it's not the Great Lakes, but
Let me.
sorry, I
end this
understand.
discussion.
Anyway, sorry.
Unless anyone has an additional question to me, I've sort of ended my discussion. I want to thank everyone for attending the forum. I hope you found it interesting. I found it interesting putting this stuff together. And I think the concept is worthy of further exploration. And I hope you do too.
I would encourage anyone who's interested in working on this, especially related to the promoting of the ideas and understanding of the early economics, to attend the Solar Power Satellite Working Group, which will be held in meeting room B, I think it is, B or 8, tomorrow. I think it's at 3 or 4 o'clock.
It's 4.
4 o'clock? Okay, and we would greatly appreciate any assistance in working on this with that group.
One more comment, Bill.
Yeah, I just want to make a tag on it, since this is the cheap access to space, and particularly one of your slides that showed the combination of tourism, satellite, space power. Is part of the point I was trying to make is that I think as we talk about lowering the cost of space, we need to avoid tagging on just the one project only. And recognizing what you're trying to develop is access to a continuum of opportunities, none of which, we probably don't even know what the real biggies are going to be. But the thing we do know that unless you get there, those are never going to evolve. So I think part of it is and that's why I kind of got into this kick of talking infrastructure versus trying to just support a satellite industry or lower it just for tourism. But it is a broad capability we're trying to put into place. And you're at this point, you're betting on the come. Let's face it, that if that's put in, opportunities are going to develop. But then the more illustrations like space power systems that we can put out that say, hey, these are big users, they're big payback, and that just helps to better quantify and make the case.
Yeah, and I think that's the purpose of this talk, to point out what the capability is. I didn't say who's going to develop this. I think it helps, though, no matter who develops it, whether it be government develops our space launch capabilities, or if it's done privately, it helps to show that there are users out there who really could use this stuff. And I think another thing we should do is maybe go to potential users with these numbers and say, does this interest you? And see what their reactions are.
Yeah, and the industry tried doing that and kind of made a dismal failure of it in trying to come up with a projection of the future marketplace. And what they concluded is that it wasn't there. But they came at it from a perspective of going with satellite manufacturers and saying, well, how many more satellites are you going to put up? And they said, not many. And they went to Disney and they said, well, are you going to put a park up in space? I said, maybe. And so that's, people think about space based on what we have today, and that's the type of answers you elicit when you ask pointed questions. But when they started, the FAA started putting in our air routes, they couldn't find Bill Smith to ask, how soon is Federal Express going to operate? And so we don't know who to go to really to ask, but we do know that when it's there, it's going to be wrong. So keep on plugging.